Welcome to the Take a Mulligan podcast with your hosts, Brian and Kenny Mulligan. We hope to encourage you not to quit and keep going. If you're at that place where you just want to stop and give up, don't. Second chances can happen. Try again and take a mulligan.
Well, hey, welcome back to the Take a Mulligan podcast. And Brian, it's great to be back in our studio again. It seems like it's been a little while here.
Yeah.
But we started this podcast to encourage people. And hopefully we inform people as well in, fitness, faith, family, and friends. But, one of the things we want to do is talk about, how people take a mulligan and stuff like that. And today our special guest is JQ, and we're just realizing we've known each other for 5, 6, maybe even 7 years, who knows. And JQ has he's been an inspiration to me. You really have, JQ. And he's got a great mulligan story. And so welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, welcome. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for having me, gentlemen.
So why don't we start with your background? Tell us, because obviously nobody knows, they're just listening. They don't know who you are, where you're from, or anything like that. And then we could talk about maybe how we connected a little bit too. But give us your background. Yeah. Where'd you grow up? What was it like?
Yeah, so I grew up in the South Bronx, specifically the Hunts Point area. And what it was like, I mean, there's a lot of different perspectives you can have. I know for me, it was certainly, it was both challenging and beautiful. It wasn't the greatest of neighborhoods. Parents, I would say I lived somewhat of a sheltered life in the sense that, my parents try to protect me from the neighborhood. Neighborhood hasn't changed too much. It is changing now. And, I say that because gang violence, drugs, prostitution, a lot of the things that you would assume are negative in a particular area, right? Whenever I do presentations, I tell students, how many of you know of a neighborhood that your parents told you don't go down that street, after a certain time, or don't go down there if you don't know anyone from that area? And then hands will go up, and I usually say, yeah. So that's the neighborhood that I grew up in.
Okay.
And so, my parents did their best, and they certainly kept me away from the streets. I wasn't a kid that was outside playing much. It was like school and then straight home.
Wow. Okay.
And parents were real like disciplined. School, home, do your homework. We're checking it for good reason and understandable. And in that, I tend to struggle too. I felt growing up, I didn't always feel like I belonged. I struggled fitting in to groups. I felt like there was a lot of expectations, not just from my household, my family, whether it was culturally or academically, but even from neighborhoods, other kids. And, I was expected to conduct myself and behave in a certain way, not just as a member of my family, but also as a boy in the South Bronx, during the 90s. Late 80s, because I was born in 87, so late 80s, early 90s. And so I struggled a lot to feel like I belonged, to fit in, find my group, find my niche, and be myself, really. And of course there were good moments, spent a lot of time at the lakes with my parents, traveling back and forth from Puerto Rico. So I'm Puerto Rican, born and raised to 2 Puerto Rican parents. So we used to spend summers in Puerto Rico, which I love.
Wow. That's neat.
Yeah, had a chance to go back recently, which was really good because I hadn't been there in years. So it was just a like really profound feeling to be back there. And so, grew up, went to private school, went to Catholic school from first grade all the way until high school. So I went to Catholic school. And, some of the same struggles in high school, I admit that I had in elementary school, as far as feeling like I belonged, feeling like I fit in, struggle to find my group. There was a couple people that I connected with throughout those times, more so in elementary school. And I'm actually still connected to those gentlemen now. But I still struggled a lot and carried that, honestly, up until college. And so I went to Binghamton University in New York, got there, I say, because of an opportunity program, the Education Opportunity Program. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with that, but it's a New York State funded program for students that, whose academics aren't the greatest and whose live and grew up in financially marginalized backgrounds. You know, it provides them with an opportunity to attend schools that they may not have otherwise had an opportunity to go to. And so Binghamton was actually the one and only college that I applied to, which
Wow.
is preposterous. And I got in because of that program. So I credit that program a lot.
That's awesome.
And I think that program holds a special place in my heart. But I had a lot of the same struggles, you know, still struggling to find myself, figure out where I belong, who am I. I spent a lot of time people pleasing, honestly, because I felt like I didn't belong. I didn't find my group. And a lot of that started early on in childhood, you know, in elementary school, at home. Um, and I didn't realize that. This is all in retrospect. And so I'm living life this way.
Mhm.
And got to college still with that same mindset, trying to figure out, you know, who I am. And I thought I wanted to study business. Um, Turns out I took calc, didn't pass. A lot of it was because I also didn't do the work necessary to pass. I was too busy, you know, too busy doing all the other things. You know, it was my first time away from home, under the, you know, from under the thumb and the discipline and structure of my parents. And so I did everything and anything that I wouldn't have done otherwise because I couldn't.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and made less than ideal choices. And so that included failing a calculus class. That included changing my major to economics, and then taking the required classes for that, and not getting the minimum needed grade, you know, and disqualifying myself from that degree, and
Wow.
you know, having a low GPA, losing financial aid, and then getting to a point where I'm really questioning myself. You know, where do I go? What do I do? You know, the school thing is what I thought I was supposed to do, what I thought would work. That doesn't seem to be panning out. And so, what else am I gonna do? Um, I've been working at, you know, a sporting goods store, Models, for those who might remember it. I was working there in between semesters while in college, and thought that maybe I'll just do that. Then quickly realized that that probably wasn't a way for me to be able to live a sustainable life that I really envisioned and wanted. Thought about military, and then I was like, if I'm honest with myself, I'm not cut out for it. It's not me.
Yeah.
I have a brother who's been in the military. He's getting ready to retire soon. You know, and so I commend folks for doing that because I know it takes tremendous courage and bravery. But I was just like, I'm not that person. Um, and so then I looked to some of the people that I knew from either back home or people that were with me in college who were from areas that I grew up in, and saw some of the things that they were involved in, and thought, well, that don't look that hard, right? And they look like they're doing pretty good for themselves. Um, Maybe I'll just do that, you know? And so folks that may not have put things together, I decided to engage in legal activity. Um, and I did that for quite some time because I thought that would bring me the success that
Mhm.
I was looking for, right? Which at the time for me was money. It was figuring out a way to make more money so I can improve my living, improve my life. And that was just the key to everything. Um, and so I thought that was the easiest way to it. Uh, and so I did that for quite some time, then learned about the kind of lifestyle that that actually brings about in terms of, you know, living, looking over your shoulder, random people who you don't know, knowing you, and not really knowing their true intentions. Um, and all the while still trying to figure out, like, what am I doing, you know? And ultimately, you know, I got to a point where uh, I started to question myself and like really think about, what am I doing? Like, is this who I envision myself to be? Is
Mhm.
this the path that I truly see for myself? And I believe I've shared this with you in one of our conversations, Kenny. I honestly, in that moment, felt like God spoke to me, you know, because I had a moment where, you know, I'm on campus, I'm just hanging out, not going to class as usual, and with a couple friends, decide to go to the mall. And you know, one of them had a car, so I asked if I could drive. They lent me the keys, and on the way there we get into an accident. No one's hurt, thankfully, but the car was damaged. And so, you know, I have all this money, I end up paying for repairs, and all I had left was just enough to continue this life. And it was in the moment where I felt like I heard God say, listen, this is your choice. You choose to take this and continue that life, and that will be who you are. It will be who you become, and you will have to deal with whatever that means.
Wow. So it was a real defining moment.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
a true turning point for me, and I've and it's what has led me to where I am now and what I do. Because college, that time was like the biggest turning point I felt for me. That moment, I never forget that moment.
And
Like,
how old
I
were you at that
remember what I
time?
was wearing. Like, I had a gray hoodie, I had on headphones, I had jeans, I was on a Coach USA bus, and literally it just felt like it just smacked me. Like, listen, wake up. You've got a choice, and it's either you continue this, and that will be who you become, and you will have to endure that life, or you choose something else. And I'll be honest, I was afraid of that life. Once I saw what it could lead to, I was like, yeah, I don't think that's the life I want either. It's not something I'm proud of. The closest people to me, like my parents and one of my friends, they didn't even know that I was involved in any of that. And I was ashamed to even share that I was doing any of that. And so it was like, I need to figure something else out, because this is not what I envisioned, and I believe that we all, to some extent, have a vision of ourselves and what our life would be, whether it's real specific and concrete, or if it's just something that's, kind of abstract in a sense. But that wasn't it for me. And so, yeah, at that point, I reached out, asked somebody for help who happened to be an EOP counselor. So that's why that, program holds a special place in my heart for me, because it was a counselor in the program who I called. That was the first phone call. And, they told me what to do, and I just followed instructions from then on. And, fast forward, finished my degree, got a master's, now working at a college as a counselor, as an academic counselor, and also traveling and speaking to students about my experiences and how they too can pull lessons from that.
So go back a minute to that
Yeah.
whole that moment that was an instant. I mean, here you had this huge opportunity that you were given, and you were blowing it. I mean, you really were. I mean, you were, you were just handed to you, where most kids would probably be like, "Oh my goodness, you got this way to go to college and all that kind of stuff," and you're blowing it. So not only is that probably weighing on you somewhere inside, if it wasn't weighing on the surface, but
Oh, absolutely.
what were some of, like, you had mentioned about that, like there's this disappointment, like, to your parents. So do you think some of those deeper relationships, going back to your mom and dad, and again, all of us with our parents had struggles. I mean, it's not like you don't, but do you think some of those deeper roots was one of the things that rooted in you, helped you to make that decision?
Yeah, I think, it certainly was. Yeah, I would say, yeah, in the fact that I thought about, and it's interesting because as I think about it, it goes both ways for me, right? So on one level, yes, it was helpful in that for me, it was like, what will they think?
Hmm.
How would they feel? How are the people that I care about? How are the people that I know even gonna feel about knowing that this is what I've been doing, this is what I've been involved in, this is the direction I've chosen? They're not gonna be proud. Well, that makes me feel terrible, and I don't want to let them down. I feel ashamed of that. And so, in one way, yes, that has propelled me. And in some ways, it has also served as a hindrance. And so, it is both. And in that moment, for sure, yeah, it is what helped propel me, because I was like,
Hmm.
I don't want to let them down. I don't want to feel like I failed them, and their sadness or pain be as a result of choices I've made. And so,
Yeah.
that was also part of it, of like, nah, I need to do something else,
Hmm.
That's an amazing example of having a good conscience, right? Because I mean, if if you didn't grow up with that, obviously you wouldn't really have cared as much about your
Yeah.
choices. They wouldn't have weighed on you as much as they did. But obviously you made choices in a better direction once you started recognizing, well, I don't want people to be disappointed. My parents that raised me, I don't want them to be disappointed in what I've done. I'm embarrassed and ashamed of what I've done. If you didn't have that conscience, who knows where you would have ended up. So, I mean, that's an amazing thing that you had that and were able to turn that around. How old were you
Yeah.
at that time when you had that epiphany?
Man, probably, let's say, I want to say around 20.
Okay.
Around 20, because I got to college at 18. I had turned 18 when I got there. and it was probably around, I got there, I'm trying not to give dates, but I got to college in 2005. That happened, I think, 2008. So
Okay.
I was around 2021,
Okay.
around
Wow.
2021, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. Um, and yeah, you know, it was certainly, um, it was this aspect of people pleasing that kind of helped,
Mm.
right? Because for me, it was like, I want them to be happy. I want them to be satisfied. I want them to be pleased with my choices, and this isn't it.
Mm.
So yeah, that's why I say it's both ways. Yeah. Cause I did have um, that conscience of like, something's not right here. And this is not something, you know, I did care about them. I care about how they felt. I care about, you know, making them proud.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. You're gonna say something, Brian?
No, go ahead.
I say it's amazing too because I think you had a choice in that moment, and some kids will. I mean, because let's face it, you're still a kid at 2021, right? I mean,
What?
we don't think it then, but we are. Um,
Yeah, nah.
but some do what you did, and it's like I don't want to hurt my mom and dad. I don't want to hurt the family. I don't want to have this reputation I'm not proud of. Where others feel an over sense of guilt, like what I've done is wrong, and I can't get past that, so I'm just going to keep on that path,
Mm, mm,
right? And they can't. And it's and man, I mean, I really believe it's the grace of God where you make one choice or the other, because one leads down a really dark road that it's never ending, because then you feel more guilty and more guilty, and the further you get away from your ideal picture of yourself and the family, the harder it is going to be to come back.
yeah. Yeah. And I would say, you know, I agree. And I think part of it too is not keeping it to yourself or to
Mm.
myself, right? Because that's the other piece, right? Along with that was I was in that space for quite some time. And it, it wasn't until I actually brought someone else into the picture and reached out and said, look, here's where I'm at, here's what's going on, here's where I'm struggling. I need help because I don't know what I'm doing. Right. What got me to that position was the fact that I didn't do that. I was too prideful, too ashamed, too like so that was the lowest point for me because I had failed, disqualified, lost finance, all those things happened. And rather than reaching out for help, I was like, well, I'll just figure this out. I'm going to just keep going. I'll figure this out on my own. And it wasn't until I finally said, yeah, I really have no clue what to do. Like I need someone else to give me some sort of direction and assistance. Um, and so, yeah, I think I definitely didn't do it on my own. You
Mm.
know, I definitely didn't do it on my own. It took having to let go of this image of what I thought I was going to be to some extent, right? Because I assumed I needed to be strong. I'm a man. You don't, you know,
Mm.
you got to tough it out and figure it out. And it's like, yeah, well, none of that worked clearly because look where you are.
Mm.
So I think it's time you ask somebody for some help here. And so, yeah, yeah.
I think it's
Wow.
interesting you had that perspective of the people pleaser characteristic in you, and like a lot of times I think that people look at that as a negative thing, because it's hard to be a people pleaser all the time, and that characteristic, that quality is tough, because how do you manage that? But in your case, it was such a huge positive thing to help you get out of it. Again, going back to recognizing you didn't want to disappoint anybody, so that people pleasing was definitely a huge benefit for you.
Yeah, yeah. I love that you mentioned that too, right? Because it was the very thing that got me there
Mm,
that also helped
mm,
get me out.
Mm.
And actually, I don't, until you pointed it out, I don't even think I made that connection. It was like the desire to people please is what led me down this terrible path. And until I flipped it into a different motivator, right, is when it projected me forward. And so, yeah, it's absolutely seeing how some of our flaws,
mm.
or maybe not even flaws, but some of our challenges can be flipped on its head to be
Mm.
turned and spinned into a positive direction. Um, and I didn't even realize that connection. Like you pointed that out, Brian. I'm like, oh yeah, it's the same thing, just
Yeah,
redirected that
right.
allowed me to propel forward. So love that.
So going back to, you mind if I ask you a couple questions about your background again?
No,
You
go
gave
ahead,
us
man.
some background. So I was just curious, your neighborhood that you grew up in, obviously you
Mhm.
said it was kind of the neighborhood that most people wanted to avoid because of the crime or whatever else that was going on in there. What was
Mhm.
culturally most of the makeup of your neighborhood? Was it mostly Latino? Was it kind of a mix?
It was a mix. It was a mix. Black, Latino, few Asian. I would say predominantly Black and Latino for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
And in what ways did you feel like that shaped anything that went forward into your college days? Was it just, this is, this was my background, this is my community, this is my culture? Did any of that shape, good or bad, moving forward into the college days when you got to that point?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, yes, there's no denying, right? I know that our environments shape who we are,
Mm,
right? And so it certainly shaped who I am. I mean, you think about, you know, anywhere in the world, say, let's just say New York City, right? New York City, when someone says, I'm from New York City, there's an assumption of what that's like, what that culture's
mm,
like, maybe the mentality. And then you can get granular, right? Oh, the Bronx, Brooklyn, like each of them have a culture to them and they change, they shift. And then, of course, like you said, depending on the makeup. So, I grew up, I would say, around a lot of hip hop culture,
mm,
right? And hip hop culture is known historically to have roots in activism, but it also developed roots in like bravado and showmanship, and entertainment. And so that I think certainly played a role in a sense that, again, that need to be tough, that need to be manly, to be strong. That certainly shaped who I was because I felt like that's what I needed to be all the time. And I'll
mm,
be honest, I wasn't that all the time. I wasn't like I ain't like fighting. I
mm.
probably had one fight ever when I was because I was afraid of fighting. Like I just getting hit looked like it hurt,
Yeah,
right?
it
But that
does.
was part of people fought. People
Yeah.
got robbed. People I've seen it happen, and so I'll be honest, that created and instilled some fear. And if I'm being transparent, I'm still working through a lot of those things. Around fear of not making certain choices because of the potential negative outcomes and things to that nature. So it certainly has shaped me because from the household to even the neighborhood, there was a lot of fear that I grew up around, and whether it was instilled intentionally or it was just happenstance, or just the nature of the environment, I certainly grew up with a sense of fear. And so that led to, fear in some of my choices, fear in some of the moves I either made or didn't make, right? Fear in asking for help in college, right? Never went to
Mhm.
tutoring, never. I was assigned a counselor when I got to college through an EOP program, barely ever met with them. And a lot of that was because I was afraid. I was afraid of letting people in. I was afraid of showing weakness, because that was oftentimes what I was teased for and made fun of as a kid. So, yeah.
Now, did your upbringing coming out of that and going to a college, did
Mhm.
that feel like maybe it was out of your reach or that's not something you could accomplish? Did you struggle with some of that kind of feelings?
Um, I'll be honest, I don't think I ever really thought of it.
Okay.
So for me, on one level, I felt like college, there was no other option. It was
Okay.
you're going to school. Like I felt like my parents, especially my mom, was like, "You're going to school, you're going to college, and more so, you're going away."
Okay.
Because at one point, I think I tried to stay local, and my mom was like, "You need to go away. You need to go away to school. Go away to school. Go away to school." And understanding now, it's because she went to a community college. She didn't have the opportunity to go away. She didn't have that
Mhm.
support. She didn't, so for her, it was like, I want you to get the experiences that I didn't have. So I want you to go away. So I felt like I didn't have a choice. And when I got there, again, the EOP program was very good. They facilitate a summer program that's aimed at helping new students adjust. So you spend time on the campus, you're meeting other students in the program who are also going to be brand new students. You take classes preliminarily so that you can adjust to a college environment.
Mhm.
And so I'll be honest, I never really even thought about it because I was so caught up in the personal aspect of it all. I was concerned of, am I gonna make friends? Who's gonna like me? Who am I gonna connect with? Who are my friends? Who are not my friends? Like I was so caught up in that the schoolwork, I'll be honest, I never really, and I was always like that as a student to some extent, if I'm being honest. I didn't really study. I was in class, I paid attention. If I got it, cool. If I didn't, I'll figure it out. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay.
You know? So I don't know that up until that point where I failed calculus, switched to economics, disqualified myself from that, and lost financial aid, that's when I started really thinking about, oh wait, hold on. Like, is this for me? You know, I had a brother who actually went to college too, and he didn't continue. He's actually the one who joined the Navy and made a career out of the Navy. And so it was at that point where I was like, dang, uh, am I cut out for this? You know, but up until that point, I wasn't even thinking about that. Um, it hadn't crossed my mind up until that moment. You know, it was like, all right, well, maybe it's not it. Maybe this isn't it. Maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I need something else. Um, so yeah, Zach, I hope that answers the question.
Oh yeah. I'm just curious how that played into it all, because you talk about fear of and trying to please people, and because I know when I was hit that college age, I didn't think. I was like, I can't do college. Like, it terrified me. It really did. I did go away. I did, I was like, I took a few community college classes for a while and that kind of thing. But we did the same thing with our kids. We were like, yeah, you're going to college. Like, I mean, and they had to pay for it. So it's like, you're going to college, you're going to figure out how to pay for it. And most of them did. But so now you get to help people that, like, you get to play the role of the person who helped you. So what does that feel like?
Yeah, it's great, man. I love it. It's funny. I met with a student earlier, actually two students earlier that remind me often of why I'm here. You know, it feels good because so in that moment when I reached out, I realized, that one, I'm not the only student that likely has ever had that experience while in college, right? Like I'm not the first one that had my experience. Maybe not exactly the same experience, but very close. I'm not the first. And I was confident that I'm not going to be the only one to ever have that experience. And so for me, it was like, how can I use what I've been through to help someone else who is either in the exact same position or a very similar position? And so literally I asked the counselor, his name is Juan Rosario, shout out to him. And so what's crazy is you see this that hangs behind me. This actually used to hang in his office when he was a counselor.
Wow.
Yeah. So yeah. So I said, listen, here's what I'm thinking. I know I'm not the first one. I know I'm not going to be the only one. How can I do what you do? Because he had a very lasting impression for me, because I remember, like, I wasn't even his assigned student. He wasn't my assigned counselor, but he was cool with a lot of the other students. He was Latino. He was born and raised in New York City. He was cool. He liked hip hop. He liked, sneakers. He was into the same things I was into. And so I used to just find my way in his office, and I would just go in his office. Sometimes I wouldn't even talk. I'd sit on a couch that was in front of this thing, and my head would hit this thing. And I'm like, what's this rug on this guy's wall? And slowly and surely, I started to develop a connection with him, and I kind of identified with him, and I saw him as somebody that I would like to be. People knew him, they liked him, he was cool, he was funny, and he actually cared. He was genuine, and I was like, man, I want to be like that. And so he was the first call I made, and I was like, how can I be you? I want to do what you do. And he literally said, call this person, tell them what you told me, speak to them, we're gonna figure this out. And so now I'm here and I'm able to do that for other students, and it feels good because it's just like I get to, and I've been able to do it on several occasions where I meet with a student and it's like, you're in the same boat that I was in. I know exactly what you're feeling, and I can pinpoint the emotions that you're feeling, and I get it. And you're not alone. It's possible. It's possible. You just have to find a way, not isolate yourself, find people that have either done or are currently doing what you aim to achieve, and ask them how to do it. And 9 times out of 10, they're more than happy to tell you exactly what they did, and tell you how to do it even better, so you don't make some of the same mistakes they likely have made. And so for me, it's just, it feels purpose. That's purpose for me, is to be here to catch a student when they're in that moment, and let them know it's all right. It's all right. You're gonna be okay. It's not gonna get easy instantly, but there's a way forward, and you don't have to go through that alone.
What an amazing story you have. It's really inspiring. I mean, to know from where you came from to what you struggled with, even miles away from home, and then to still have gotten out of that and gotten to where you are now, and now helping other people that struggled through what you may have. And it's really an incredible story. What would you say now, looking at your life now, what would have been the biggest influence you think that would have been in your life when this all occurred and kind of once you made that transition to get in the right path? What do you think was the biggest influence at that point? Was it a person, or I know you mentioned a little bit about like that divine intervention you felt, but
Yeah. Wow. It's hard. I'll say it's kind of hard in retrospect to pinpoint one thing. I definitely do credit the divine intervention. I do think that God spoke to me in that moment, but I think it was all at once. It was all converging, right? It's like I'm on this bus. All I have is enough money to keep living this lifestyle. I felt like it was a voice saying, "Yeah, you see that? That's literally down to the last cent. All you have left. So you two choices. You could use it for that and keep that, or you could just get rid of it and do something else." And then at that moment, I think of this counselor, and who he is, and for me, he kind of represented what was possible. You know, he was the representation, and so that played an influence. Of course, thinking about how one of my best friends from childhood would feel about where I was at and what I was doing, actually knowing because I had a conversation with him about it and he told me how he felt. And then how would my parents, because my parents had no clue. My parents didn't find out until I'd probably say a decade later, maybe more. Because I finally, once I knew that I was going to start sharing this as part of my public speaking and as part of how I help folks, it was another friend who told me, you probably should tell your parents before you
yeah,
tell other people publicly first.
that's
And
true.
I hadn't thought of that. And I was like, oh, dang, you're right. She was like, yeah, you don't want your parents to find out the same time everybody else finds out. Like, that's just not cool. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So yeah, it's hard to say like one thing. I think it was all those kind of converged at once, to shape that and influence that and push me forward.
So now, what led you to that next step where you're a counselor, you're helping kids out? That's awesome. But there was still something deeper inside you that said, I gotta share more. I gotta tell more people. So what drove you there? And then like, what were some of the steps you took to take that next step?
Yeah. So, it's actually that's a beautiful question because speaking was never something that I had in my purview ever. Right. So once I had recognized and decided I wanted to be a counselor, that was like the goal. The goal was I want to be a counselor, and specifically at Binghamton and in EOP. That's what I want to do. And the universe and God would have it differently. You tell him your plans, and he laughs. And so I finished grad school, and I didn't get hired right away as a counselor. Struggled to find some jobs, applied to a bunch of stuff, never heard back. Some got denied. And then I was encouraged to apply to be a resident director at Binghamton. And actually, I was telling somebody this recently. That was a job that I never wanted, because based on some of the experiences I had, working with a resident director and being around some of those folks, I was like, I don't know if I want that. I don't know if that's a lifestyle I could see myself doing. So I avoided it up until the point they offered me the job. I was like, yeah, so, could I have some time to think about the offer? I have other positions that I'm waiting to hear back from. I'll tell you, it was a lie. I had nobody offering anything. I was just trying to find a way out. And they gave me like 2 days. And I was like, dang. So eventually, again, I reached out to my community. At this point, it was other counselors that work at the EOP office, other folks I had met. By this time, I had established somewhat of a network of folks that I felt comfortable relying on and seeking advice from. And they encouraged me and said, do it. You want to work with college students. Yes, we know you want to be a counselor. This would be a great opportunity to get your foot in the door at an institution of higher education. And you're going to learn a lot. So I took it, never regretted it, had the greatest time in those 3 years. And it was, I think in my first year, I was doing a presentation for some students who were interested in being resident assistants, which are the RAs, the folks that live in the halls with the students and kind of are the, go between the resident director and the residents, the students. And we're explaining, I'm part of the committee that hires these folks or facilitates the hiring. So we're doing a presentation on what the process for applying to be a RA is. And when my slides come up, I go in front of the room. I'm like, all right, so, I'm here to explain the next steps for you to all become RAs. So first step is you actually have to attend one of these info sessions. So everybody give yourselves a round of applause for completing the first step. And the whole room starts applauding. And it's like 100 and something students. And in that moment, I was like, oh, interesting. So then I was like, well, actually, I just wanted to see how much control you guys would let me have over you. So thanks for that. I appreciate y'all indulging me. And then they all started laughing. And it was then I just got into the groove. I was like, wow, this is really fun. So much so that I ended up taking the slides from one of my coworkers. I wasn't supposed to do his slide and I just kept going into it. But it was in that moment that I was like, wow, to have that much influence and honestly power in a room, could I do something positive with that? And I didn't know this in the moment. When I reflect back, it took me back to earlier times in my life when I was doing music. This is something I didn't mention. So music has always been a part of my life. In the household on weekends, listening to salsa music while we clean the house. My dad played saxophone from, I don't know how early on in his life. So he's a saxophone player. My grandfather's a trumpet player. My grandfather had a band in Puerto Rico. My dad used to play with my grandfather in his band. My dad went to music school. So I grew up around a lot of music, and I started writing music and songs probably in about 7th grade.
Wow.
So that's something that I didn't share, but it's a thread, and it came later in life. So I had opportunities where I had performed when I was in college. And so that kind of moment took me back to that. It was like a performance aspect, but it was a different layer to it because now I had a captive audience that would engage with me. Like usually if you're performing, you do your songs and you get off stage, there might be some interaction, but you're not having a conversation with them necessarily. And so I was like, man, if I could do something positive with that, that would be great. And that's where the idea of, wait, I do want to share my story with students, and I can do that as a counselor, but I could also do that as a speaker. And so yet again, I went to the thing that worked. I reached out to somebody who does it and has done it and asked them, hey, here's what I'm thinking. How do I do this? And it happened to be another one of my fraternity brothers who speaks professionally. And I called him. I said, hey, man, I know that this is something you do professionally. I'm thinking about doing it. I figure I'd reach out to you and ask you some questions on how I could get started. Give me a call when you have a chance. And he called me back and he said, hey, do this, do that. Here's what you should consider. You have a captive audience because you're working with students already. Find ways to get in front of groups of students and speak. And then on top of that, as part of my role as a resident director, we have to facilitate trainings for our incoming staff. And whenever I would get up to talk in front of our staff, my coworkers will be like, you're so good at speaking. Oh my God, you're so inspirational. You're so motivational. Like, I feel like you could be a motivational speaker. And I used to be like, really? Thanks. And in the back of my head, it's like I'm thinking about it, but I never said anything. And so I kept getting that from them consistently. Every time I did a presentation, oh, you should speak. You're so good at it. And it was fun, And so that led me to then say, all right, well, let's find a way for me to be able to do this. And so my supervisor at the time, she was super helpful because she sat with me and she was like, all right, so you want to speak? What's your message? And we sat in my office for like 2 hours and she just kept asking me questions. And every time I said something that she thought was noteworthy, she's like, you should write that down. And so I write it down and then we'll keep talking. And she's like, you should write that down. And I'll write it down until eventually I had, I had a phrase, I had talking points, ideas. And then I just kept talking with people, talking with my fraternity brother who speaks and got ideas of how do you structure your talks, and just learn the art of it through practice, repetition, and asking for support. And then communicating to others that this is something that I do. And so my supervisor at the time, she found my first opportunity to speak. She was the one who found it and gave it to me. Yeah. Or offered it to me, I should say. Yeah.
That's so cool.
There's so many cool things in all of that. I just got to point out for you.
Yeah.
One is I think. Well, let me go backtrack for 1 second. Don't worry about your calculus. I fought with calculus too when I was in college. It was the worst class I ever had. So that's all right. We don't need it anymore.
A lot of folks do.
But you have so many cool things in there that I don't even know if you realized. One is utilizing people around you and recognizing, if I can't do it, let me find somebody who can help me do it. And that's just such a cool thing that people we overshadow that too much. There's so much that we know we can't do or aren't capable of, don't know how to, don't have the resources, but being smart enough to find somebody who does. And look what it did for you. You got into it. They helped you out. They molded you into what you were, gifted to do. I think that's amazing. And then the other thing I wanted to point out, so you mentioned a lot about still dealing with some fears of growing up and just, whether you're going to make bad choices or anything like that. So now take us through a little bit. Now, obviously speaking in front of people, right? For some people, it's very, very natural. And it sounds like it was that way for you once you discovered that, which is awesome. The fear factor though. So where does that fit in? Is that still there when it comes to doing that? Or does that not really even have anything to do with fear because you're just so comfortable with it?
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that question. So what's interesting, I'll say this first. What's interesting, right, is I was the kid in the classroom who never raised his hand.
That was me too.
Yeah, never raised his hand.
Don't call on me, man.
From first grade until graduate school. I did not raise my hand in class. The only times I ever spoke in class is if I was called on by the professor or the teacher, or if we had a presentation, because you have no choice. You have to get in front of the class and you need to do a presentation. And in those times, I was the student that if I had notes, I was shaking and trembling in front of the class. And so I remember early on when that would happen, at some point, it was in grad school, I noticed that happen. And I was like, I can't hold anything in my hands because it's clear that I'm terrified up here. And so to circle back to your question, the fear of speaking in front of groups is still kind of there, but it's different. Because it's not so much, I think it's not so much, before it used to be like, how do I look? Do I look ridiculous? Do I sound dumb? Am I going to sound stupid? Am I going to mess up? Am I going to look, am I going to be laughed at? And it was all those things that I was worried about. I was worried about myself. And now the nervousness and sort of excitement is, oh man, who am I going to connect with? Who's this going to resonate with? Who's this going to impact? And so I say a prayer every time right before I'm about to start speaking. I always say, Lord, work through me. Let me be the vessel. May the words that come out be yours, and let it reach those who you intended to reach here today. I say that every time because I know what I'm going in there to say, but I don't know it word for word. I just have a general idea of points I'm going to hit, and everything else kind of just comes out based on what I'm seeing, what I'm feeling, what I'm observing, what I think might land. So there's still some nervousness there. It's just not the same. It's different. I'm not so much concerned about how I'm going to look. I'm more concerned about who am I going to be able to reach.
Wow. That's amazing
It's bigger than
insight.
me, and I think that's kind of what helps. It's like, I try to remind myself, like, this isn't about you. It's about who's out there. Because you are you. I mean, my story is mine. I'm and it used to at first, I'll say that too. When I first started doing it, I still had that. Oh man, am I going to look ridiculous? Am I saying too many ums? Am I, am I staying quiet too long? Am I awkward? Does it make sense? Am I just rambling? And sometimes I still have that. I'm like, all right, I think I'm rambling. And I'll just say it out loud, and then people start laughing, and then we move on, So yeah, it took a lot of practice and repetitions. And even with the practice and repetitions, there's always still a little bit of nervousness, but it's not the same anymore.
Yeah, just like anything else you mentioned in life, it helps to have a coach helping us speak too,
Oh
because
yeah.
they see so many things that we don't see. You hit on something that is very, I don't know if I ever put it in that word before. Maybe you didn't even realize you said it, but
Probably not.
you said something about a conversation with people when you're speaking. And I was like, wow, that is such a key component
Mhm,
to public speaking, because
mhm.
you're not speaking at people. You're really trying to create a conversation where they're not really speaking, but they are, because you're trying to
Yeah,
say something where you know where they're going in their heads. And then you say the next thing, or you probe the next question to the next thing that they're thinking in their minds. Right. And so
yeah,
you literally are having a conversation as you're speaking.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, and for me, it's I try. I don't want to talk at you, and I'll
Yeah.
say that sometimes. Especially one of my programs that I do is my favorite one is the self-care program. It's centered around mental emotional wellness, and it includes hip hop music. So I have an album entitled Self Care that was a therapeutic relief for me. And it wasn't until after I created it and after I released it that I was like, oh, wait, there's something here. I could actually
Hmm.
use this to speak with students around mental emotional wellness. And it can be entertaining, but also informative and also helpful. Um, and so I share that because even in that presentation, I often tell them, I'm like, it ain't just gonna be me talking. We're gonna have a conversation. I'm gonna ask questions. It's gonna have dialogue. We're gonna do this together. We're going through this together.
Hmm.
And some of that is also too of having been in the presence of folks who speak and they're just talking at you. They're not. They're just here. I'm talking at you. I'm giving you a bunch of information. Hopefully you take it and I move on. Right. And for me, it's no. I want to connect with you. Like I want to ask. I'm gonna ask specific questions to you, or I'm gonna ask questions that I know everyone can relate to in some way. Might be different, but there's a thread of commonality,
Hmm.
because I want us to feel like we're in it together. You know, I mean, we're in it together. We're living this life. We're on this planet with other people. We don't live by ourselves. And so for me, and I learned that because I watched other speakers. That was one of the tips that my mentor and my fraternity brother gave. He's like, watch other speakers. He was like, watch
Hmm.
other speakers, look at their videos, study them, see what they do that you like, see what they do that you don't like, incorporate the things that you do like, and don't incorporate the things that you don't like, and make things your own. Be yourself,
Hmm.
make it your own style. And I used to do that. I do that with my counseling approach. I do that with my speaking approach. I see someone do something. I'm like, oh, that was cool. I like that. I'm gonna use that.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I try to make it as engaging. Even when I'm doing the performance and the music, I usually don't even like to stand on the stage. Like I tell the clients, like, if we can have a handheld, I want a handheld wireless, or if we can have a lapel, I want a lapel, because I want to get off the stage and I'm gonna walk in between the
Yeah.
aisles and I'm gonna, touch the student or touch someone in the audience, shake their hand. I'm gonna be in close to them because I want to know that them to know I'm a real person. Like I'm
Hmm.
not I'm you. We're
Yeah. Yeah.
we have our own life stories, but I sleep, eat, breathe, and bleed just like you.
Hmm.
And I think that's also part of it, is I make it real. I'm not above you. I'm not away from you. I'm right here.
I think one of the neat things, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about public speaking and communicating. And I don't know if you guys have heard this yet, because this blew me away, but it wasn't that long ago where we called it the age of the geeks, right? Where if you were in the geek world, okay, you're the king, because that's where the world's going, right? And
Mm-hmm.
they what they were talking about in this podcast was, we're now in the age of the communicator, because we are
Mm-hmm.
so inundated with so much stuff out there, so much noise, right?
Yeah.
That the ones who learn how to cut through that noise and communicate clearly to what people really need are going to really rule this world. Like, I mean, they really will, in the sense of, they're going to have a large audience, because people are looking for that authenticity. They're looking for somebody who can connect to them, and who is not speaking just at them, but is walking along with them. And so, yeah, so you're in a neat place in what you do, and hopefully I'll get better at it. But
Yeah. 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 No, I agree. I actually had never heard that. Well, I hadn't heard about the age of the geek. I hadn't heard that one, but the age of the communicator, I feel like I may have heard that, and it makes sense,
yeah.
because you want to connect. It's about connection.
Hmm.
And what comes to mind too is not only being able to cut through the noise, but speak to are you guys familiar with Rick Rubin at all?
Nah, that doesn't sound familiar.
So Rick Rubin, he's known in the music industry. He's a producer. And what's fun about him is he actually doesn't play any instruments. He's like a tastemaker, you would say. He goes into recording sessions with artists and he literally just listens and gives ideas. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's it. He knows what he likes. I love watching interviews with him because he says it. He's like, I just know what I like. And others might like it and others might not like it. And it's okay. Like, I just know what I like. And I bring him up because he recently posted something, or not recently, but I seen him post something on Instagram one time that said, "You are the audience." And what he means by that is you speak to you because there's other people out there that are like you. They care about what you care about. They are into what you're into. They resonate with the things that resonate with you. And so it speaks to what you mentioned, Kenny, about authenticity, right? And so it's not only cutting through the noise, but also speaking to the truth that you have, because others share that truth in some way, shape, or form, and that's how you reach them, because you cut through everything else that doesn't reach them. So yeah, I just that came to mind, so I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So we should wrap it up here, man. We should ask our final question that we ask everybody. And yeah, it is, man. Time flies. So what?
Yeah. Oh wow.
Yeah. Time goes by. So obviously we're on Take a Mulligan, and so you have so many mulligans you've taken here. Right now, like, is there one you're taking, or is there one recently you said, "Oh yeah, man, I took a mulligan on that you want to share with everybody"?
Yeah. So actually, I would say I'm currently in the midst of one. I would say I'm currently in the midst of one, and in the sense that I'm entering a new phase of my life, a new chapter in my life. And so I say specifically, it's we talked about, right, some of my history of people pleasing, of trying to find out where I fit in. And so I think right now I've had a transition in my life personally where now I'm taking another shot at being myself in a different way, right? I did that at one point while I was in college, and at various points, right, changing careers and opportunities. And now on a personal level, I'm stepping into a different and newer version of myself. So it's almost like I see it as taking a mulligan of myself, or as myself. And so we'll see what it looks like. It's evolving. But I would say, yeah, I'm in the midst of one currently.
Okay. That's cool.
That's great.
So is there anything you could say to, I know there's probably a ton of these, to encourage, maybe some students out there to say, hey, like, encourage them to take a mulligan and some of the stuff you've gone through? Like, what would be something you would say to say, hey, go for it? Like,
Yeah, I would say, in relation to taking a mulligan is, let's say you tried some. We won't even call it a specific thing, but let's say you've tried some and it didn't necessarily work out. In thinking about giving it a second shot, know yourself deeply, assess yourself deeply, and understand parts of you that have contributed to where you've gotten and why it may not have worked out the way you wanted it to. Because understanding yourself and how that has played a role in a positive way can be flipped to when you take that second shot, you're now more informed of the role you've played in the previous result and how you can shift your role in the second attempt. And I feel like that applies in any area. That could be school, that could be at work, that could be in relationships, it could be in anything, right? It's understand yourself deeply and what factors have influenced and led you to the result that you've had thus far. And then when you go for that second attempt, understand, all right, this is how it played out for these reasons. These are the things that shape my choices. Well, this is the desired outcome. How can I shift some of those things so that I can have a different outcome the second time around? And I say that as I'm currently doing that. So, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, it's amazing. In a world where we want to blame everybody else, you're challenging us to look at ourselves, and I love that. Really do.
Yeah, it's both and, right?
Yeah.
It's not. It's funny. I used to hate when my dad said this. I used to hate it, and now I understand it. Right? My dad always said it takes two to tango.
Mm-hmm.
Takes two to tango, right? And so I used to hate it, and now it's like, yes, it takes two to tango. You only have control of one of those two, and one of those two is you. You know, and so control what you can control, and understand what you can't control.
It's awesome. Well, JQ, it's been great having you on our podcast, and I'm so glad you came on here.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad this was fun. I enjoyed this very much. Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
And thank you to all you've been listening, and we're glad you're here with us.
We know everyone can use a second chance or a do-over, so take a mulligan and try again. Thanks so much for joining with us today. Make sure you follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. Like, click, and subscribe.